So today we are going to do worksheet 2C. This is still relating to what we worked on yesterday with the $8 an hour problem, okay? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to complete this table based upon yesterday's work, okay? So remember, how did we find our earnings? What did we do? For 11 and a half hours, what did we do to find our earnings? Who knows?
Multiplied it by 8.
Exactly. We multiplied the amount of hours by the hourly wage. So 11 and a half times 8 gave us 92. And you could copy these right from our chart from yesterday. For 20 hours, 20 times 8 gave us 160. I'll just put that for the first one so you understand what we're doing. 16 times 8 gave me 128.
But isn't it total earnings, not earnings per week?
For our columns that we're filling in right now, it's just that total earning for week 1 is 92. I go horizontally. For week 2, it's 160. If I say what is the total earnings of all 5 weeks, then we would totally add those up.
But I mean, don't you add week 1 to week 2 because it's total earnings for the weeks?
No, the way this chart is set up is just asking us, like right here, in week 2 for 20 hours, what was your total earnings for that week? So not just like for the day. 10 hours would give me $80 and 9.5 would give me 76. Okay, so this was the same chart we had from yesterday. Okay, now that we have that chart, we're going to go ahead and answer some of these questions. Some of these may be similar to yesterday, but some of them are new. So this first question says, what is the least amount of hours you could work per week? So we're talking about hours. What's the least amount of time you could work in general?
0 hours.
Yeah, 0. Does that make sense to everybody? So 0 hours is the least amount of time. You're not working at all. Now, for this specific problem, what is the greatest amount of hours that we did work? So let's look at our chart. Let's go to hours. And which week had the highest amount, and what was that?
Week 2.
Week 2.
160. It was 160.
That's the dollars, but we're still just talking about hours. So in week
20 hours.
Exactly. So here we'd have 20 hours. Now, it's possible to work more than 20 hours, but for our data, the highest amount of hours we did was 20. Okay? This time, this column right here is going to be what we call our independent variable and on our x-axis. So right above this chart, I'm going to put an x right here. That is my x variable. Now question 2. What is the least amount of earnings you could receive? So what's the lowest amount of money you could receive ever?
0.
0, exactly. We don't work at all, so we make no money. Now, for our problem situation, what was the greatest amount we did earn? Look at our chart for money, and the biggest number there is
160.
160. Whoopsies, sorry, I put, it's going to erase, not hours there. I'm talking about dollars. Okay? This money, our earnings, is our dependent variable. And it is on our y-axis. So notice over the column for total earnings, I'm going to put a y. It's a dependent variable because the amount of money I make depends on how long I work, right? The more I work, the more money I make. So they are related to each other. This is going to be very helpful to identify for when we graph. We always want to know what will be on our x-axis and what will be on our y-axis. Any questions? Okay, so with that being said, we're going to now make another table that helps us with our boundaries for creating a graph. So notice here, I have my two variables. What variable was time again? Go back up to our chart. It was the what variable, the X or the Y? X. So I'm going to put X there again. And our earnings was our Y variable. Make sure we're staying on top of things and copying our work down, okay? It's really important. Now, our lower bound is just what it says. It's the lowest amount. So what did we say for time is our lowest amount? What's our least amount of time?
0.
0. And what's the least amount for earnings? 0.
0.
Right? So our lower bound is there. Now, if we were talking about temperatures, maybe temperatures weren't at 0, maybe temperatures were negative, right? We can actually have negative temperatures. We don't have negative time in this situation. So that's why for both of these scenarios here, we're at 0, okay? And most of our graphs for the next stretch of time are always going to have our lower bounds be 0. Once we start talking about the past tense, that's where we could start to have negative, okay? Our upper bound is those highest values. So what was my upper bound for my time? What was the most amount of time I worked?
20 hours.
20, exactly. Again, I'm just going back to my data and looking at what the highest amount of time was, and that was 20. And what was the highest amount of earnings?
160.
160. Okay? Knowing that information is going to help us now calculate what I should count by on the graph. Okay, so you don't scroll right now, I'm just going to scroll. Here's my graph. If I'm talking about money and I count by 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I want to plot $160, that's going to take me way off the graph, right? 160, counting by ones doesn't make sense. So our goal for our intervals is to figure out what is a good number to count by. Should I count by ones, twos, fives, tens? And so let's actually figure that out, okay? So what you're going to do always is you're going to figure out how many lines there are on your graph that you're given. So this is a generic one, but maybe you have graph paper, or maybe you printed out your own graph. So we're going to count on our x-axis how many lines there are. Ready? There are, starting from the beginning, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So there are 20 grid lines. I'm just going to put that in parentheses up here so we know that. So always double check how many grid lines you have and jot that down.
So does this mean that, like, for the graph we'll count by like 20s?
So what that is, and I'm about to explain, is when we're going to find our calculation of our intervals, we're going to divide, and I'm just going to jot this down and then we'll actually do it. Divide the upper bound by the number of grid lines. Okay, so we're going to divide whatever that upper bound was by the number of grid lines. That's how we're going to do it for now. Once that lower bound starts to change to other things besides 0, then we have to figure out a new plan, but this is the way we're going to do it. So if we take the first one for time. Hi, Caitlin. I see you just came in. We are working on worksheet 2C. Okay, worksheet 2C.
Okay, my internet wasn't working.
That's okay. Thank you for coming in. So for time, we're going to take that upper bound, which we said is 20, and we're going to divide it by the number of grid lines, which also happens to be 20. And what's 20 divided by 20, everybody? 1. So what my interval for time is just going to be 1. Now for the earnings, we're going to do the same thing. Divide the upper bound. What's the upper bound for earnings, did we say? 160. And I'm going to divide that by the number of grid lines, which is 20. When we divide that, 160 divided by 20, it gives me 8. Okay? We can count by 8s. However, we don't have to be exact. Is there a number close to 8 that you're more comfortable counting by, nice and quick?
10.
10, exactly, right? 8s are okay, but do you know, like, okay, we have 8, 16, 24, 32. But if we do 10s, 10, 20, 30, 40, we know those really fast. So we can count with the interval of 10. You never want to round down though. So we wouldn't, with this 8, we wouldn't want to go down to 5 because then you'll run out of room on that graph. We also don't want to go too crazy high. If I get 8, I don't want to start counting by 20s. That's too far away from that number 8. But 10 is rather close and an easy one to count by. Does that make sense? So here's a question. What if I did my calculations out and I got 3.4? Do you want to count by 3.4s? No. So what would be a good interval to count by instead? What is 3.4 close to that's easy to count by in your head?
3.
Okay, 3, but be careful about that because you rounded down, we would run out of room. We always want to round up a bit. So,
5.
Yeah, 4 would work, or 5 would be even better in my opinion because personally, I think we're all better at counting by 5s, right? 5, 10, 15, 20. But 4s would be fine, okay, if you want to do that. But we always round up. I know rounding rules. If it's like a 0.2, we go down, but we always round up for our intervals, and then we pick them that are pretty close to the number and usually, quote unquote, nice numbers that we know how to count by. Does that make sense? Okay, so now we're going to use these intervals to help us graph. So let's go down to the graph. And we're going to start to label everything. Please make sure you are copying exactly as I am. Okay? Let's all be sure what we understand what an x-axis is versus a y-axis. Does anyone know what the x-axis is?
I do.
Okay.
I learned it like the walk before fly thing.
Okay.
So like X is the bottom, Y is the side.
Very good. So I'm just going to label over here. Here is my x-axis, the bottom one. Okay, and I'll just sort of highlight that, but you don't need to. And then my y-axis is the one on the left going up and down. So I'm going to put that at the top here. Okay? That's important to know because let's go back to my table. Right? What did I say is my x? I said time is my x. So what I'm going to do in this label down here on the x-axis, I am going to write time, if I can spell it, time worked. Now, there's a room for parentheses here. We need to put something in there. And what goes in there is the specific unit. How are we measuring time in this problem? Are we measuring it by seconds, by minutes, by hours, by days, by months, by decades? How is time being measured in this problem? Go back up to, what's that? Hours, exactly, Alishka. Good job. So in parentheses right here, I'm going to put hours. Okay, make sure we're copying. Who can tell us what you think goes on the labels for the y-axis?
I can.
All right, anybody else?
The money?
Money, exactly. So we're going to be specific. We're going to either write money, money earned. Now, I got to go sideways here, which is a little tricky for me with this tablet. I'm going to do my best. Money earned. And how do I measure money? What unit do we use for money?
Dollars.
Dollars. Very good. I think that was Tim's voice I heard. So dollars goes there. Any questions? Okay, now we're going to actually label the axes. So we said our lower bound is going to be 0. So at the very bottom left of my graph, I'm going to put a 0 right there. Does everyone see that okay? What did we say we're going to count by for time? And we can go back up to my intervals. For time, we said my intervals are going to be by ones. So along the x-axis, we are going to label by ones. So everybody take a minute to do so. It should take you to 20. Once you have that, you can count on the y's. And what did we say we're going to choose to count by for the y's? Tens in our interval. So on the y-axis, we start at 0 and then we have 10, 20, 30, 40, etc. So keep on doing that. Be very careful that you don't skip a number or a line. Okay, so we should get up to 200 for that one, which is good because we said our max earnings was 160. So that gives me plenty of room to plot 160. If my max earnings was 160, but my graph only went up to 120, we wouldn't have enough room. So that's why the interval we chose is good. Give you guys a minute here to make sure you have that all labeled. All right, so now that you have your graph all labeled, we can actually plot the points. So let's go back to our table from the very top and from yesterday and plot our first point. Our first point is 11.5, 92, right? For 11 and a half hours, we made $92. So I'm going to go over to where time is and go over to 11 and a half hours, which is right between the 11, 12, and then up to 92. Have we all plotted before? So here's my first point. 11 and a half is in the middle, and then 92 is slightly above the 90 mark. Okay, make sure we are plotting our points. Keep on going. Let's do the next one. The next one is 20, 160. So we go over to 20 for the time worked and up to 160 for the earnings. Okay, so always the X value on the bottom first and then up along the Y. Okay, our third point was 16,128. So over to 16 on the X and up to 128, which will be just below the 130. What do you notice with my points so far? Yes, Alishka is saying in class, they're making a nice straight line. And that's our goal because we're going to be working with linear equations right now. All right, we have 2 more points. 1080 is our next one. So we go over to 10 and then up to 80. And last but not least, we have the ordered pair 9.5, 76. So 9.5, 76, somewhere about here. And look at those beautiful points. They're making a nice linear equation, a straight line. Here's the deal, guys. All the problems we're working on for the next bit of time should create a nice line. If they don't, there's 2 things that could have happened. Either you plotted a point incorrectly or one of your calculations from earlier above is wrong. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, before we leave this graph, what do we have to do with these points?
Connect them.
Exactly, connect them. So you guys all have a folder near you. Take that straight edge of the folder, or if you have a ruler, that's great too. Take a straight edge, connect those dots, and then make a line. I don't want to see any crazy curvy lines, okay? So take a straight edge. Now, I can't do that on this tablet, but I'm going to do my best. And you can extend it well beyond your points. And we could even put an arrow at the end because technically we could keep on working and continue to make money. Does anyone have any questions with how to graph? We're going to be doing this a lot. So key things, determining what goes on the x-axis and the y-axis, determining what my interval should be, and then plotting the points correctly. Any questions? Okay. Once you have that graph all set, we're going to continue on to the next part. And we're going to do 5A together. 5A says, use your graph that we just made to answer the following questions. Answering complete sentences, be sure to use your graph. So it's saying for 5A, how much would you make if you worked for 14 hours? So we could do multiplication to figure that out, but I want to use the graph. So the way I'm going to do that is it's asking for 14 hours. So I go back up to my graph, and where am I going to look at? I'm going to look at the 14 on my x-axis because that's our hours. I'm going to grab a different color. And once I get over to 14, I'm going to go up. Look at my orange here. I'm going to go up until I hit that line. I'm hitting the line right here at this yellowy orange point. What amount of money does that correlate with? Can anyone tell?
110?
Yes, exactly. I think I heard a couple people say that. Exactly. Once I hit the blue line, then I go over onto my earnings. So now I'm going to the left here. and I'm seeing that it correlates with about 110. So the answer to 5A is, in a complete sentence, I would make about, or approximately, $110 for 14 hours. Does that make sense how I used the graph? So we go to the hours and then up to the line. What if the question said exactly and not approximate? In that case, we would actually have to do the calculation and take our hours and multiply it by that hourly wage. When I do that, just so you guys know, 14 times 8, that hourly wage, gives me 112. So tell me my approximation. Was my approximation a good approximation? Yeah, right? 110 is super close to 112. So that's telling me we did a fantastic job with our graph and it's very accurate. Okay? So here is what I would like you now to do, is I would like you to continue working on the rest of this worksheet. You have 2 more examples, just like we did, and then you have 3 questions that are talking about analyzing the graph and writing it in complete sentences of explaining things a bit more. Okay? So that is our plan for the rest of class. We have a few more minutes to lunch, so I would try to get B and C done before lunch, and then when we come back, we will check in and continue to work on the last 3 problems for the rest of class. Are there any questions?